So this video is going to be a tad different than some others, and why? Because this one is going to feature a violin. And why am I going to be? Why are we featuring the violin? Because there are 3 episodes that I've chosen to talk about here that all feature the violin in their scores, written by 3 different composers who really could not have been more different in their composing style. Some people think the Twilight Zone episodes are all cut from the same cloth. They're all kind of follow the same format. I mean, they don't. If you look closely at them, they really don't. And they hired different people to write scores for incidental music scores or ad hoc scores for some of the episodes, not all. But when after somebody wrote a score, usually parts of it were extracted and reused in other episodes that came later, and even in other TV series. So the 3 composers that I'm going to talk about are Bernard Herrmann, Jerry Goldsmith, and Nathan Van Cleave, who all wrote for Twilight Zone, and all of them wrote a number of scores. So I think it's appropriate to discuss all of them. So starting with Walking Distance, which was written by Mr. Herrmann. It was written for maybe a total of, I don't know, 14 or 15 musicians, but it was Walking Distance's score was written for string orchestra, meaning no winds or percussion, and it worked just wonderfully well just to have the violins, violas, cello, and bass, double bass. So this score, of course, runs the gamut of emotions. The emotions borne out in the storyline, which were in turn reflected in the music, as any good score does. And Herrmann has long been recognized as a composer who was like second to none in terms of his ability to capture human emotion through his music, and Walking Distance was definitely no exception to that. So I think most people kind of know the theme, which is in the first violins. And then, of course, later as it gets more dramatic, and back to this again. As the episode is kind of closed out, and then there's another solo of the violin somewhere in the middle. I don't know the notes right off the top of my head without listening to it again. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of the score. I don't have a copy of any of these scores because I think they're long gone by this point. But anyhow, Walking Distance, of course, needs no real introduction. It was one of the finest episodes written by Rod and one of the finest in the series. But it's kind of funny. Those of you who watch these commentaries that are on some of the DVDs and elsewhere have heard Rod talk about the flaws and the illogic that he came up with in this script about how the guy goes back in time, Gig Young goes back in time and meets meets his father and meets his mother, and then sees his younger self, and he kind of tore it apart and then compared it to A Stop at Willoughby, which was he called an infinitely better show, although A Stop at Willoughby was not a time travel episode like Walking Distance was, going 25 years into the past, back to the mid-1934 or something. It really needs no introduction, but or much of a commentary, because it speaks for itself. And I mean, it was so well acted, and so well directed by Robert Stevens and staged and photographed, especially the merry-go-round element. It's just, it was quite incredible. But the music, of course, brought it to a whole new level. Now, to talk about the Invaders, everybody knows the Invaders as Agnes Moorehead's episode. And, pre-Bewitched, everybody from Bewitched that you can think of was on Twilight Zone. Agnes Moorehead, Elizabeth Montgomery, Dick York, David White, and a number of others as well, who appeared on Twilight Zone episodes. But this was Agnes Moorehead's really tour de force. And of course, the only talking comes from Serling at the beginning, and then Douglas Hayes, the director, is doing the voice of the astronaut at the end, before the ship gets hacked to pieces and he, the second astronaut, is killed. So the score for the Invaders featured also a string orchestra, and there was no harpsichord in. I was trying to think of it without listening to it and watching the episode again. It doesn't. I don't think it has any harps. It has no harpsichord in it. But his score for back there has a harpsichord, but the one for the Invaders is just strings and piano. And I dare say it's probably not even as big an orchestra as was used for that Bernard Herrmann used for Walking Distance. So some people are familiar with this kind of theme that opens the first act when the gal is standing there, this old woman is standing there and stirring the cauldron and so forth, and it's this. And on it goes. And then you hear some other stuff as she's going up the ladder and everything's completely pitch dark and she's just got her lantern in her hand, this stuff with the pizzicato. And on it goes. So Goldsmith knew how to write actually really pretty well for the violin, I think. He knew how to write for violinists, although so did Bernard Herrmann, and I don't think either of them were violinists, but that's the thing. If you're a composer, if you are a good composer, you have to know how to write for all the instruments and know what they're capable of. There's a lot that the violin can do, but you have to know how to, you have to know its capabilities and know how to write for it. As any good film score does, and Lord knows both of them were two of the best who ever lived. Now, to talk about, and so my commentary on the Invaders, again, there's no real introduction that it needs. It kind of speaks for itself. It's, in a way, it's kind of corny. It's like this woman is out there here in the middle of no place in a farmhouse, and God, what the hell does this woman live on? Weeds and maybe some potatoes. You just all we have to go on is like the stuff that she chops up in the kitchen. But I've heard any number of kind of analyses of what the old woman stands for and so on. But the whole punchline is that these invaders came from Earth, and she's obviously not on planet Earth. She's from somewhere way off in the some other planet or wherever. But it has a tremendously good atmosphere, and despite Matheson never really being a fan of these waddling robots, at least for its day, it was quite innovative. So now, third and finally, to talk about I Sing the Body Electric. And I Sing the Body Electric, of course, has gone down in history as being the controversial Ray Bradbury episode that had trouble galore, not just with Bradbury always hating how it turned out, and it was not true to his short story, and he couldn't stand Rod Serling, especially after that, but for other reasons too, which I won't go into, but have been well documented over the years. And he really remained bitter towards Rod, from that point up until the end of Rod's life and the end of his own life, which came about 10 or so years ago. So, but the one thing that did come out of it that was very good was, one, the performances by, I think, by David White and Josephine Hutchinson, which I think were fantastic. Yet there's another Bewitched cast member, David White, and Josephine Hutchinson as the grandmother, which were both very good. And then Veronica Cartwright was very good as Anne, the oldest daughter, and then the other two kids, Dana Dillaway and Charles Herbert, who were known for, Dana was known for her other Twilight Zone episode, which was one for the Angels, and then Charles Herbert was in a good number of films, including Rod Serling's Requiem for a Heavyweight. He was the kid at the very end who has that wonderful, like, tear-jerking scene with Jack Palance when Mountain McClintock is on the train going back to Kennesaw, the city where he originated from, and then Mary LaRoche is there playing his mother. So, anyhow, I Sing the Body Electric was the story of, the mother of the kids has died, and now the idea is that the dad is going to go to this facsimile limited store and buy a grandmother. Pre-packaged, pre-made, pre-assembled, custom-made grandmother who comes walking, is assembled in the factory, and then one day comes walking down the street when their kids are playing with their kite. So Nathan Van Cleave was not as nearly as well known as the other two composers, but he was very, very competent in his own right, and that's why Twilight Zone kept hiring him to write scores, and he wrote probably about 8, 9, 10 of them. He was a very fine composer. He was also a big band leader in his career, and you can kind of hear it in some of his scores. He likes to use like kind of jazzy sort of themes and so on and so forth. But also you can tell that he was rather well versed in classical. So the main theme of I Sing the Body Electric was this. And so on and so forth, and then kind of some suspenseful stuff later. It comes later on. So that score did have had some flutes and wind instruments. Maybe I don't know if it had any brass or percussion. I don't think so. But very nice, very nice. And then the other part of it, of course, was that it was filmed and it just did not work, and they had William Claxton who started on it, and then Jim Sheldon started on it, and then I think William Claxton was the one who finished it up. When they brought everybody back for some reshoots of different scenes, and Vaughn Taylor was also in it, and everybody knows him from his other, like 4 other Twilight Zone roles, and it ended up just fine. As a whole, but as Serling made commentary of at the time, Ray Bradbury is a very difficult guy to put on screen. What reads so beautifully on the printed page does not work well on the screen. It's like people. It's like you listen to these people saying this dialogue. And it's like, well, that's not how anybody talks. And Twilight Zone was just it was supposed to be about ordinary people who find themselves kind of in these extraordinary circumstances. That was the whole premise of the show. So I think I Sing the Body Electric turned out rather well for what it was. It turned out fine. It made it. It worked. But I have seen over the years like people who have made comments about like when it was like one of the few worst that was ever done, and so on and so forth. So I mean it's open to individual interpretation. But it came together okay. I mean, probably thanks to the reshoots and them trying to get it to work out, and it worked out. So anyhow, I try to add some variety to these videos, and I don't know if I can. Those are the big 3 that I can think of where the violin was featured prominently, and I don't play any other instruments. I did learn the piano before I learned the violin. But suffice it to say, music was a very big part of Twilight Zone. And those 3 composers, I wanted to do this video to kind of highlight them, since they scored most of the incidental music for the series. So I hope you enjoyed it, and at least my modest attempt at using my own violin playing to demonstrate. As I say, I don't have the scores sitting in front of me. I don't know where they might be at this point in time. Probably just long lost, or in some library or something. Whoever has compiled all the works of Jerry Goldsmith, and there's probably a collection of theirs of all of those scores, and then Bernard Herrmann and Van Cleave I don't even know about. But I do remember a long time ago in 2004, I called Jerry Goldsmith's agent asking if he might be interested in coming to the Twilight Zone convention that I was doing the next week. That we were doing the next week, and it was kind of short notice, but on the day I made that phone call, he passed away. And then I read about it the next day in the paper, in the LA Times. It's like and the agent said, I'll ask him, I'll call him and see. And then the next morning in the paper, he passed. I read that he passed away. So that was quite sad. That was quite sad. But given the fact that he was such a legendary composer. But perfect timing on my part, right? So I've got a lot of these stories, and not all as interesting as others, but they're all up in my brain, and I'll never forget them as long as I live. But yeah, and even if I tried to, I don't even know if I could get them all down on paper or into a video or something like that. But anyway, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.